Without my permission, she stationed 2 trucks in my garage and proceeded to file a $2,000 HOA complaint against me, citing unauthorized commercial activity. It was a shame she was unaware that I had leased that same garage to the county sheriff. On a Tuesday at 6 a.m., I stepped outside to see 2 enormous diesel trucks obstructing my entire garage. The engines were still warm, the air reeked of exhaust, and oil was already forming stains on my concrete. The metallic ticking of the cooling engines blended with the sharp, chemical odor of fresh motor oil that stung my nostrils. I could see Brenda through her kitchen window, holding a coffee mug and wearing the most self-satisfied smirk I had ever witnessed, as if she had just won a chess match I didn't even know was being played. What she hadn't accounted for was Deputy Martinez's arrival in 2 hours to retrieve tactical gear. Moreover, the HOA violation notice she had already drafted was about to serve as evidence in a harassment case against her. The woman had effectively declared war on an individual who meticulously documents everything and leases property to law enforcement. What would be your course of action if someone commandeered your garage and then attempted to fine you for it? My name is Dale, and at 52, I've come to understand that most problems possess straightforward solutions. A career of 28 years repairing engines at the Ford dealership taught me the virtues of patience, precision, and the ability to identify trouble before it can spoil your day. Yet, nothing could have prepared me for Brenda. I came to own this corner lot ranch house in Millfield, Texas, after my wife, Sarah, passed away 3 years ago. Cancer claimed her quickly, and the ensuing medical expenses took everything we had. Now, it is just me, my German Shepherd, Rex, and a home that is more valuable than I can afford to maintain. My salvation arrived from an unlikely place. The county sheriff's department required a secure location for storage, and my detached 3-car garage was an ideal fit. An income of $400 a month may not seem like a significant amount, but for someone living on disability and a meager pension, it represents the line between keeping a home and becoming another foreclosure statistic. Deputy Martinez has been leasing the space for 18 months. He stores tactical gear, emergency supplies, and evidence bags, visiting twice a week with predictable punctuality, always professional and courteous. The concrete floor retains the honest scent of motor oil from my years as a mechanic, now combined with the metallic smell of police-issue equipment and the subtle chemical aroma of evidence preservation materials. It's a flawless arrangement that benefits the community while ensuring my utilities remain on. Then, Brenda became my next-door neighbor. Envision a woman who believes her landscaping business grants her the authority of the neighborhood's self-appointed property manager. She moved in 6 months ago with her husband, Chuck, an oil rig worker astute enough to be away for work 11 months of the year. In her first week, she secured a position on the HOA board and initiated her campaign to enhance property values, a euphemism for making everyone miserable until they submitted to her vision. She operates 2 massive trucks, a company vehicle carrying commercial mowers and mulch spreaders, and a personal pickup capable of towing a small house. Both are too large for her own driveway, so instead of securing proper commercial storage, she deemed my property a more convenient option. The initial red flags appeared during her backyard barbecue 2 months prior. It was a full-scale event with catered food, a hired DJ, and enough alcohol to float a small ship. The bass vibrated my windows until past midnight. Around noon, both of her trucks materialized in my driveway, as if they belonged there. I knocked on her door politely. The mixture of barbecue smoke and diesel fumes was already giving me a headache. "Brenda, I need you to relocate your trucks. Deputy Martinez has his scheduled stop this afternoon." She gave me a cursory glance from her spread of catered food. "It's just for temporary overflow. This is my property, not a public parking area." Her tone turned icy. "Don't be so dramatic, Dale. A single afternoon isn't going to harm anyone." 6 hours. She kept those trucks parked there for 6 long hours as her party continued unabated. When Deputy Martinez came for his equipment inspection, he was forced to park on the street and walk around her vehicles as if they were permanent installations. The sound of gravel crunching under his boots echoed as he took the circuitous route. He was too professional to voice a complaint, but was visibly annoyed. I offered my apologies 3 times. It was the most mortifying experience of my retirement. It was then I grasped that this wasn't about the convenience of parking. It was a display of power. Brenda was asserting that her needs superseded those of everyone else, including the county's law enforcement. The harassment intensified almost immediately. The following week, I observed her photographing my property with her phone, cataloging every angle as if she were a private eye compiling a case. My garden, my fence, and even Rex's doghouse were subjected to her surveillance. Just updating the neighborhood records for the HOA, she stated with that same cold smirk. Following that was the violation notice, printed on flimsy copy paper that crackled like dry autumn leaves. Unapproved commercial activity detected. Cease unauthorized business operations within 30 days or face a $2,000 fine. She was going after my financial lifeline. As I stood there holding that notice, seeing her satisfied grin through her kitchen window, her strategy became perfectly clear. This was not some random neighborly squabble. This was a calculated financial assault. Brenda had investigated my circumstances, pinpointed my weakness, and initiated a methodical campaign to eliminate my source of income and compel me to sell. Too bad for her. She chose the wrong retired mechanic to challenge. Rex emitted a low growl, sensing the danger. He's a smart dog. He knew we were under siege before I did. 3 days following that mortifying barbecue, Brenda launched her first official volley. A certified letter materialized in my mailbox, one of those bulky, legal-sized envelopes that signals expensive legal trouble. The return address was for the Millfield Meadows Homeowners Association, yet I could almost detect the scent of Brenda's cheap perfume on the documents. The complaint charged me with operating an unauthorized commercial enterprise that contravened residential zoning regulations. In her meticulously constructed narrative, my lease with the sheriff was a business venture that threatened the neighborhood's character and property values. She insisted on the immediate cessation of all commercial activity, along with a $2,000 penalty for the ongoing infractions. This is where her research proved inadequate. She had called for an emergency HOA board meeting on Tuesday, but somehow neglected to inform me until Monday afternoon, a classic ambush strategy designed to catch the target off guard and overwhelm them. Unfortunately for her, she picked the wrong mechanic to try and blindside. I passed Saturday morning at the county courthouse, inhaling the distinct aroma of old paper and bureaucratic inertia while sifting through property records. The records room had the atmosphere of a library where all excitement had gone to perish. However, sometimes the most mundane paperwork holds the most explosive revelations. "Well, I'll be," exclaimed Martha, the clerk, as she adjusted her spectacles to inspect my original deed. "Your garage was built 15 years before this HOA even existed, dear. That's what we refer to as a grandfathered use." Martha clarified something I hadn't thought of before. When a structure is built prior to the formation of an HOA, those improvements are often protected by what lawyers term grandfathered use clauses. In essence, your property rights can be older and thus more powerful than their new regulations. Sarah would have appreciated this legal nuance. She always maintained that the best defense is knowing more than your adversary. The truly stunning discovery, however, came from researching Brenda's own situation. The municipal code explicitly requires special permits for the overnight parking of commercial vehicles weighing over 10,000 pounds in residential areas. Both of her landscaping trucks surpassed that weight, and her file showed precisely 0 permits. On Tuesday evening, I strode into that community center meeting room, equipped with facts and a sense of impending victory. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and nervous perspiration. 5 board members were seated behind a folding table that looked like a relic from a church bazaar, with Brenda positioned squarely in the middle, like a judge preparing for sentencing. "Mr. Hensley," she started, referring to her notes with a theatrical air of importance, "your unauthorized commercial lease is in clear violation of Section 4.3 of our Residential Use Covenant. We are ready to levy immediate fines." "Hold on there, counselor," I cut in, sliding my research from the courthouse across the cheap table. "My garage was constructed in 1987. Your HOA wasn't established until 2002. That provides 15 years of grandfathered protection." The sound of rustling papers echoed in the abrupt quiet. The silence was so profound you could have heard a pin drop, until Frank Morrison, a retired postmaster who had been a resident since the area was undeveloped, began to chuckle as if he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. "Dale is absolutely correct. Frank declared after examining my documents. I recall when you built that garage. My late wife, Clara, brought you lemonade while you were working on it. Brenda's face transitioned from pale to red to a shade of purple in about 3 seconds. That's entirely irrelevant. Current zoning takes precedence. Speaking of current zoning, I said, relishing each syllable. Let's talk about Section 12.7 concerning the storage of commercial vehicles in residential zones. I laid out photographs of her trucks, including the manufacturer's weight specifications and time-stamped evidence of overnight parking. Both of your vehicles are over the 10,000-pound residential limit. You have been in violation for 6 months without the necessary permits. Frank actually slapped the table and roared with laughter. Well, Brenda, it seems you ought to familiarize yourself with those zoning laws before you use them against others. It appears Dale has just used your own tactics against you. The room fell completely silent as everyone absorbed what had just unfolded. Brenda had walked directly into her own snare, attempting to attack me with zoning laws she herself was violating. Her expression went through about 6 different shades of mortification. "This is utterly ridiculous," Brenda sputtered, her carefully crafted authority disintegrating like wet paper. "I'm trying to safeguard our property values from his police compound." "You mean the arrangement that has county law enforcement present in our neighborhood twice a week?" interjected board member Patricia Walsh with a sweet tone. "The very one that likely reduced everyone's homeowner insurance premiums?" The meeting unraveled more quickly than a house of cards in a windstorm. Brenda demanded genuine legal measures and stormed out, leaving her violation notice behind as if it were toxic material. The other board members voted 4-0 to throw out all accusations against me and served Brenda with a formal citation for her own commercial vehicle infractions. As I walked to my truck later, I could taste the victory in the cool night air, which was still tinged with the diesel fumes from her illegally parked vehicles. But through her kitchen window, I saw Brenda pacing and gesticulating wildly on her phone, likely trying to contact every lawyer and city official she knew. The following morning confirmed my suspicions. Her trucks were strategically parked to obstruct access to my mailbox. While not technically illegal, it was annoying enough to deliver a clear message. By noon, the city had logged an anonymous tip about excessive dog barking from my address. Rex hadn't barked excessively since he was a puppy, but facts are irrelevant in a harassment campaign. Round 1 went to Dale, but Brenda was only just getting started. Brenda's public shaming at the HOA meeting held for precisely 48 hours before she took her fight to City Hall. The certified letter from Millfield City Planning came on Friday morning, adorned with enough official-looking seals to cow a federal judge. The complaint asserted that my lease with the sheriff was establishing an unauthorized quasi-commercial district that infringed upon residential character preservation codes. It was accompanied by color photos of Deputy Martinez's patrol vehicle, equipment drop-offs, and even pictures of me conversing with county staff in my driveway. Somebody had been quite industrious with a telephoto lens. The letter referenced Municipal Code Section 8.4 regarding the preservation of neighborhood residential character and summoned me to a planning commission hearing in 2 weeks. But one detail grabbed my attention. The complaint was submitted by concerned residents, but had been processed by Jennifer Walsh from the planning office. That name was familiar, as Patricia Walsh from the HOA board had noted that her daughter was employed at City Hall. Small towns often have a way of turning everything into a family matter, and it seemed Jennifer had inherited her mother's sense of justice along with her surname. I opted to visit Jennifer before the scheduled hearing. The city planning office, situated in the basement of a municipal building apparently designed by someone with an aversion to natural light, had the aroma of industrial-grade carpeting and unfulfilled ambitions. Jennifer was a weary-looking woman in her 30s who seemed to avoid eye contact, as if I were a carrier of some contagious disease. "Mr. Hensley," she began, nervously shuffling papers, "I assume you're here concerning the zoning complaint." "I'm here concerning the truth," I stated, easing into the visitor's chair, which groaned like aged bones. "You see, I've been pondering how someone came to file this complaint using the precise legal terminology and with such perfect timing." Jennifer's face turned as red as a traffic light. "I'm not at liberty to discuss active cases," she muttered. "Fair enough. But since I'm here, perhaps you can clarify something for me about home business permits." I had dedicated the previous evening to research that would have made Sarah proud, delving into municipal codes until my eyes ached. It emerged that operating a landscaping business from a residential property necessitates specific permits, particularly if commercial vehicles are being stored and clients are being met at the home address. Brenda's business registration indicated her home as the main office, yet she had never applied for a home occupation permit. This oversight was akin to leaving your front door unlocked while complaining about the risk of burglaries. Hypothetically, I went on, presenting printed copies of the municipal codes. What are the consequences for someone who runs a commercial business from a residential property without the required permits? Jennifer examined the documents, and I observed her professional demeanor disintegrate faster than a house of cards in a gale. "These trucks, how much do they weigh?" she inquired faintly. "Over 12,000 pounds apiece. Both are registered as commercial vehicles and are parked overnight in a residential zone without permits," I clarified, enjoying every moment. The irony was exquisite. Brenda was leveraging residential character preservation statutes against me while flouting those very same laws herself. "There's more," I added, showing her photographs from Brenda's barbecue that depicted client consultations occurring at her home. Landscaping quotes, design discussions, payment transactions, all commercial activities taking place in a residential area. Jennifer gazed at the evidence as if it might detonate. "Mr. Hensley, this creates a difficult situation for me. I'm not suggesting you do anything improper," I reassured her. "I'm simply proposing that the Planning Commission should be in possession of all relevant information before it rules on matters of residential character preservation." 2 weeks later, the hearing room was more crowded than a can of sardines. Brenda showed up with a briefcase and an air of confidence sufficient to power a small town, obviously anticipating another straightforward win. She had even brought her husband, Chuck, for moral support, though he looked as if he would prefer to be wrestling with irate bears. "Mr. Hensley's commercial lease operation fundamentally changes the residential nature of our neighborhood," Brenda started, referring to her prepared notes with theatrical gravity. "We have documented proof of increased traffic, commercial vehicle presence, and unauthorized business activities." She displayed her photo evidence with the assurance of a prosecutor presenting an open and shut case, each picture crafted to make my arrangement seem like a commercial truck stop. Then it was my turn. "Commission members," I began, rising slowly to maximize the dramatic impact. "Mrs. Thompson is entirely correct about the importance of preserving our residential character. That is why I was astonished to find that she herself is in violation of the very codes she is invoking." I presented my counter-evidence systematically. Brenda's unpermitted home business, her commercial trucks exceeding the residential weight limits, and client meetings held at her residence without the necessary zoning variances. She was guilty of every violation she had accused me of, only on a larger scale. The best part was that Jennifer Walsh had done her due diligence after our meeting, and the Planning Commission had a complete file on Brenda's infractions right there on the table. Commission Chairman Robert Hayes cleared his throat with the solemnity of someone about to deliver a verdict. "Mrs. Thompson, it seems you are running a commercial landscaping business from your home without the correct permits." Brenda's confident demeanor vanished like ice cream on a hot day. That's entirely different," she stammered. "Actually," Hayes pressed on, "Mr. Hensley's setup appears to be properly documented and legally sound, whereas your business operations are not." The commission voted 5-0 to dismiss the complaint against me and to issue violation notices to Brenda for her unpermitted commercial activities. Chuck looked as though he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. As I left the hearing, I could sense victory mixed with Brenda's palpable desperation. But I also understood this was far from over. Being publicly humiliated twice in a month would push someone like Brenda to a dangerous level of desperation. As expected, the next morning I found fresh scratches on my mailbox and an insurance claim form in my driveway. Round 2 went to Dale, but the game was just becoming compelling. The insurance claim form was a nasty surprise in my driveway, fluttering in the morning air next to what appeared to be new evidence of vandalism. Brenda's meticulously prepared complaint alleged that Deputy Martinez's patrol car had scraped her fence during a standard equipment retrieval, resulting in significant property damage and persistent safety issues. The quoted repair cost was $3,500, with additional demands for emotional distress and inconvenience. I went to inspect the alleged damage, with Rex trotting alongside me, his nose working intently. The scratches on Brenda's wooden fence were so fresh, they still smelled of paint thinner, that sharp chemical scent that stings the nostrils and indicates recent work. The marks were in perfectly straight lines at about bumper level, too consistent to have been from an accident. Either Deputy Martinez had discovered a method for scraping wood through thin air, or someone had been very resourceful with spray paint and a putty knife. "Good morning, Dale." My neighbor Mildred called from her garden, where she was deadheading her roses with surgical precision. At 78, Mildred had witnessed the neighborhood transform from farmland to a subdivision, and her memory was keener than her pruning shears. "I saw some peculiar activity at Brenda's last night. The woman was out there with a spray can, working diligently on that fence." She paused, her gaze as sharp as glass. "The odd thing is, I could have sworn that fence was perfectly fine when I took my afternoon walk." Mildred's Ring doorbell system served as the neighborhood's de facto security network, recording everything from mail deliveries to Brenda's escalating campaign of harassment. "You might want to review the timestamp on my video from around 6:30 last night," she recommended with the subtle shrewdness of someone who knew that evidence always trumps allegations. I got in touch with my insurance provider right away and spoke with investigator Carl Thompson, who had been dealing with fraudulent claims longer than I had been repairing engines. Carl's tone was weary, like that of a man who had seen every possible scam. "Mr. Hensley, we receive about half a dozen fabricated damage claims each month. Most perpetrators aren't clever enough to stage them convincingly, which simplifies our work." He detailed how insurance fraud investigations adhere to a specific protocol: analysis of the timeline, assessment of the damage, interviews with witnesses, and, crucially, a review of any video evidence. People attempting to defraud insurance companies often overlook security cameras until it's too late. "What makes this particular claim suspicious?" I inquired, though I already had a good idea of the answer. "Well, for one, the claimant filed within 12 hours of the supposed incident, complete with professional-grade photos and a repair quote from a contractor who shares her business address. That suggests either extraordinary efficiency or extraordinary premeditation." Carl showed up the next morning with measuring tapes and a camera that could likely capture fingerprints on a raindrop. The fence damage revealed its own narrative under his expert examination. The scratches were too consistent, too recent, and applied from an angle inconsistent with any vehicle impact. "These marks were made by hand tools, likely a putty knife or a scraper," he stated, highlighting slight variations in depth and direction. "Vehicle impacts leave irregular patterns due to the forces and momentum involved. This looks like someone used a straight edge for guidance." The Ring doorbell footage was the final blow Brenda never anticipated. Mildred's camera had recorded her at the fence at 6:47 p.m. the previous evening, meticulously applying gray spray paint in even, horizontal strokes. The video was sharp enough to make out the Rust-Oleum brand on the can, and the timestamp confirmed the damage was created more than 12 hours after Deputy Martinez's last visit to my property. You could even hear Brenda muttering to herself as she worked, likely rehearsing her narrative as the victim. When Carl presented Brenda with the evidence, the change in her was dramatic. She transformed from a self-assured complainant to a panicked defendant more quickly than a car hitting a wall. "Mrs. Thompson," Carl said with the calm of someone professionally delivering bad news, "insurance fraud is a felony that comes with severe consequences, including possible jail time and a permanent criminal record." The color vanished from Brenda's face as if a drain had been opened. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she stammered, now unable to look anyone in the eye. "I was just touching up some pre-existing damage." "The video shows you inflicting damage, not fixing it," Carl countered, referring to his notes like a prosecutor presenting charges. "You have 24 hours to voluntarily retract this claim, or we will proceed with filing criminal charges with the county prosecutor." Brenda withdrew her claim before noon, but her reputation was irrevocably tarnished. In a small town, news travels faster than gossip, and by that evening, everyone was aware of her failed insurance scam. This incident was the final straw for Chuck. That night, I could overhear him through their open kitchen window, his voice heavy with the weary frustration of a man at his wit's end. "Brenda, this needs to end." "Insurance fraud?" Are you serious? I will not go to jail because you can't accept losing an argument. Their marriage was fracturing under the strain of her obsession, and Chuck was smart enough to begin devising his escape plan. But cornered animals are the most dangerous. The next morning brought anonymous tips to animal control about Rex's supposed aggressive behavior, along with a mysterious inspection notice from the health department concerning unsanitary conditions on my property. Brenda was exhausting her official avenues of attack, which meant she would likely get more creative soon. Round 3 went to Dale, but I suspected the real fight was only just beginning. The county tax reassessment notice came on a Tuesday that began ordinarily, but ended with my world turned upside down. Millfield County was performing routine property value updates, which is bureaucratic jargon for, "We require more revenue, and you are going to be the source." My modest ranch house had, according to them, surged in value by 40% in the last 3 years, meaning my property taxes were set to escalate from manageable to disastrous. I laid the documents out on my kitchen table, a familiar dread settling in my stomach like a bad cup of coffee. The new assessment would raise my annual tax bill to nearly $6,000, double my previous payments. On my disability pension and small Social Security checks, there was no way I could afford such an increase without the income from the sheriff's lease. Even with that $400 a month, I would be stretched perilously thin. It was then that I understood why this reassessment felt so dubious. The timing was too perfect, arriving just after Brenda's public humiliations at the HOA and city planning meetings. Property tax reassessments are typically done countywide, but this notice was specifically for my address and 3 others on my block. All were long-term residents, all on fixed incomes, and all, coincidentally, had recently faced HOA complaints. The next morning, I drove to the county assessor's office, seeking answers in a building that smelled of old carpets and faded aspirations. The clerk, a stressed woman named Janet, retrieved my property records with the practiced ease of someone who had fielded these questions countless times. "Your assessment was flagged for review following a complaint about unapproved commercial improvements," she stated, pointing to highlighted sections of the report. "Someone alleged that you had converted residential space for business use without the necessary permits." The complaint was anonymous, but the details were suspiciously precise, referencing the sheriff's lease, equipment storage, and supposed property alterations that had never happened. Someone had thoroughly prepared before attempting to use the tax system as a weapon against me. "Janet," I said, maintaining a calm tone despite the rage welling up inside me, "that garage was constructed in 1987. No modifications or conversions have been made. It is the same structure that has stood there for decades." She scowled at her monitor. "The complaint indicates recent commercial enhancements and increased property use. Our assessor determined the new valuation based on those reported changes. The system was functioning precisely as intended. Anonymous tips led to reassessments, which raised tax burdens, which in turn pushed people from their homes. It was a cruel but elegant strategy." But then Janet mentioned something that altered the entire situation. "You know, this complaint arrived through an unconventional route. Most requests for reassessment come from real estate professionals or developers trying to set market values. This one was referred directly from the city planning office. The city planning office, Jennifer Walsh, who had been feeling remorseful about her part in Brenda's zoning complaint. I went directly to City Hall, where Jennifer was waiting with the expression of someone burdened by a heavy secret. "Mr. Hensley," she said before I had a chance to speak, "I need to talk to you about that tax reassessment." She revealed that Brenda had been pressuring her to find creative solutions for dealing with problematic property owners, specifically naming elderly and disabled residents who lacked the resources to effectively defend themselves. The tax reassessment was intended to be the final, crushing blow, to plunge me into a financial crisis, render the sheriff's lease untenable, and create a chance for a property takeover. "She's been inquiring about other residents as well," Jennifer confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street, the Rodriguez family on Oak Avenue, all long-term homeowners, all recently dealing with unexpected HOA issues." The strategy was becoming evident. Brenda wasn't just after me. She was orchestrating a systematic effort to displace established residents and buy up undervalued properties for her growing landscaping business. But Jennifer's guilt had yielded an unforeseen benefit. I copied everything before I fully understood what was happening, she said, pushing a manila envelope across her desk. Brenda's requests, the specifics of the complaints, even some emails about neighborhood investment prospects. She paused, finally making eye contact. I can't reverse the reassessment on my own, but this evidence might assist you in challenging it. Walking back to my truck, I felt the various pieces fall into place like a puzzle Sarah would have solved in an instant. This wasn't a personal vendetta, it was a business tactic. Brenda had singled out vulnerable homeowners, investigated their financial statuses, and devised a plan to oust them through methodical harassment and bureaucratic exploitation. Too bad for her. She had underestimated the wrong mechanic. It was time to switch from playing defense to going on the offensive. That manila envelope from Jennifer felt like holding a stick of dynamite with a lit fuse. But dynamite is only effective if you know how to handle it. I needed assistance. And luckily, small towns operate on networks of people who have been looking out for one another long before Brenda arrived. My first destination was the Legal Aid Society office in the courthouse basement, a tight space filled with the aroma of coffee grounds and resolve. Attorney Rebecca Martinez, who happened to be Deputy Martinez's sister, specialized in cases of elder abuse and property rights. She examined Jennifer's evidence with the intense focus of a surgeon studying X-rays. This is a systematic campaign of harassment with a clear financial motive, she concluded, arranging the documents on her desk like a battle map. We're past the point of neighborly disputes. This is organized intimidation intended to compel property sales. Rebecca detailed how harassment campaigns aimed at vulnerable homeowners typically follow a predictable course. First, they identify properties in prime locations owned by individuals with limited means to resist. Second, they exploit official systems like HOA complaints and city code violations to apply financial strain. Third, they escalate their efforts until the targets either sell at a low price or lose their homes to tax liens. Your situation is a classic example of predatory tactics, she noted. But having such detailed documentation is exceedingly rare. Most victims are unaware of what is happening until it is too late. She outlined our legal approach. Document every incident, file harassment complaints with various agencies, and prepare for both civil and criminal proceedings. More importantly, she recommended we broaden our alliance to include other affected residents. Predators like Brenda seldom target just one person, Rebecca cautioned. If we can find her other victims, we can establish a pattern of behavior that will be much more difficult for the authorities to dismiss. My next visit was to Mildred's house, where I discovered her hosting what she referred to as afternoon tea, though it looked more like a strategic planning meeting. Seated around her kitchen table were 3 other longtime residents, all of whom were grappling with recent HOA complaints or sudden city violations. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street had been hit with noise complaints about her air conditioning unit. The Rodriguez family on Oak Avenue was contesting allegations of unauthorized vehicle storage related to their work truck. Frank Morrison, the retired postmaster, had been ticketed for having too many lawn ornaments, his garden gnomes, which had been a neighborhood staple for 15 years. Brenda has been quite industrious, Mildred remarked, pouring coffee with the efficiency of someone who had been organizing neighbors long before HOA boards were a thing. Every complaint was filed in the last 6 months, and all are aimed at people who have lived here longer than her own sidewalk. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to search for. Systematic harassment aimed at displacing established residents to create opportunities for property acquisition. Frank had conducted his own investigation, reviewing HOA board meeting minutes since Brenda's arrival. She's been asking probing questions about property values, length of ownership, and cases of financial hardship, he shared, adjusting his reading glasses. She even requested a list of residents over 65, claiming it was for a community outreach initiative. The woman had been compiling target lists with military precision. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher with the sharp observation skills of someone who spent 40 years managing adolescents, had noticed something else. She's been taking pictures of properties when the owners are away, measuring driveways, and even checking mailboxes for letters from mortgage companies. The reconnaissance had been meticulous and systematic, gathering intelligence to maximize the impact of her timing. We resolved to coordinate our efforts through what Mildred tactfully termed enhanced neighborhood communication. Everyone agreed to document any future incidents with timestamps and photos. Frank would keep an eye on HOA activities and give us early warnings about new complaints. Mrs. Patterson would connect with other targeted residents and distribute legal resources. I would act as the main point of contact with law enforcement and legal aid. However, our most significant asset was the wider community support we had been cultivating without even knowing it. Local business owners, from the hardware store and the diner to the gas station, had been observing Brenda's escalating actions with increasing unease. Small-town businesses thrive on stable neighborhoods, and systematic harassment campaigns are detrimental to everyone's property values. Tony Castellanos, the owner of the hardware store where Deputy Martinez purchased supplies, offered to keep a record of any unusual purchases that might signal plans for escalation. A woman came in last week asking about security cameras and motion detectors, he told us. She said she needed to monitor property line violations. It didn't sit right with me, so I told her we were out of stock. The diner owner, Maria Santos, had overheard Brenda's phone calls during lunch meetings with contractors and real estate agents. She's been talking about development prospects and neighborhood upgrades that sound more like property flipping ventures, Maria reported. She even brought up specific addresses and asking prices. By the end of the day, we had gathered what Rebecca described as the most thorough documentation of harassment she had ever encountered. Video proof, witness testimonies, financial documents, and, most critically, evidence of Brenda's systematic targeting of vulnerable residents. We had sufficient material to file complaints with the county sheriff, the district attorney's office, the state real estate commission, and the federal housing authority. But documentation is only effective if you are ready to use it strategically. Rebecca set up meetings with law enforcement agencies for the following week, while I braced for what I anticipated would be Brenda's most desperate escalations yet. Cornered predators don't give up without a fight. They typically resort to increasingly reckless behavior. The coalition was prepared. It was time to see how far Brenda would go to safeguard her schemes. Brenda's desperation became apparent in a series of increasingly clumsy attacks, revealing that she was short on both patience and clever strategies. The morning after our coalition meeting, I found that someone had poured motor oil all over my driveway during the night, leaving a slick hazard that smelled like a garage fire and would be expensive to clean. The timing was no accident. Deputy Martinez was due for his weekly equipment check that afternoon, and traversing the oil slick would be both perilous and humiliating. However, Brenda had made a critical tactical mistake. Motor oil doesn't simply vanish, and a trail of drips led directly from my driveway to the storm drain, continuing in a suspicious path toward her property. More significantly, she had used the same high-viscosity oil required by landscaping machinery, the type that leaves a distinct additive signature upon testing. I contacted Rebecca immediately, and she arranged for environmental services to document and analyze the spill. The illegal disposal of petroleum products results in severe environmental fines, particularly when it poses a threat to municipal water supplies. The attacks intensified over the week with amateurish sabotage that would have been comical if not for its malicious intent. Someone had loosened the bolts on my mailbox, causing it to lean precariously toward the street. My garden hose was slashed in 3 places, flooding the side of my yard and destroying Sarah's cherished rose bushes. Rex's water bowl was mysteriously filled with a substance that smelled like bleach, necessitating an emergency trip to the vet, who confirmed an attempt at chemical poisoning. Each of these incidents was meticulously documented with photographs, timestamps, and statements from neighbors who were now actively monitoring for any suspicious behavior. The pattern highlighted Brenda's escalating desperation and deteriorating judgment. She had moved from sophisticated harassment via official channels to crude acts of vandalism that left an evidence trail even an inexperienced detective could trace. Mildred's Ring doorbell system recorded shadowy figures moving through our yards after dark, consistently approaching from the direction of Brenda's house. While the video quality wasn't sharp enough for a definitive identification, the timing and movement patterns were building a strong circumstantial case. Frank Morrison made an even more damning discovery while monitoring the HOA board. Brenda has been using official board letterhead to submit false complaints to various city departments, he reported during our evening strategy call. Noise violations, health code infractions, even accusations of illegal dumping. all directed at the same long-term residents we've identified. She was essentially faking official HOA communications to manipulate city bureaucracy against her targets. This level of fraud pushed her harassment campaign into the realm of serious criminal activity. The turning point arrived when Mrs. Patterson's security system caught Brenda in the act of property damage. The retired teacher had set up motion-activated cameras after her air conditioning unit was tampered with, and Tuesday night's recording clearly showed Brenda trying to disconnect the electrical wires to the outdoor unit. The video was of courtroom quality, complete with timestamps, clear facial recognition, and evidence of criminal trespass and attempted property destruction. But Brenda's gravest mistake was her interference with emergency services. On Thursday morning, a house fire broke out 3 blocks away at Mrs. Morgan's home, which quickly filled with hazardous smoke. When the fire department arrived, they discovered their usual access route was blocked by strategically positioned construction barriers that had not been there the day before. These barriers compelled the firefighters to drag their hoses an extra 100 yards, delaying their response by critical minutes while an elderly woman's life was at risk. Fire Chief William Torres was livid when he learned the barriers had been erected without city permits or any notification to emergency services. Someone intentionally obstructed emergency access during an active fire, he declared at an emergency city council meeting. This is not mere vandalism or harassment. This is criminal endangerment that could have resulted in a fatality. The barriers were traced back to Brenda's usual supplier and had been delivered to locations that would specifically hinder emergency responses in the targeted neighborhood. This interference with emergency services was the final act that shifted our situation from a civil matter to a criminal investigation. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez submitted a formal report to the county prosecutor's office, detailing the pattern of escalating harassment, property damage, and interference with public safety. This has gone beyond a simple neighbor dispute, he stated in his official testimony. We are now investigating organized criminal activity aimed at forcing property sales through intimidation and sabotage. Local newspaper reporter Sarah Kim launched an investigation following Chief Torres's public remarks about the obstruction of emergency access. Her initial article, titled "Systematic Harassment Campaign Targets Elderly Residents," brought regional focus to Brenda's actions and led to calls from other communities facing similar predatory tactics. The story was building a momentum that Brenda could no longer control. By Friday evening, Brenda's landscaping business was losing clients rapidly as news of her criminal behavior spread. Chuck's truck was noticeably absent from their driveway most nights, and neighbors reported hearing loud arguments about lawyers, divorce, and potential bankruptcy. The pressure was finally causing her life to fall apart, just as she had tried to do to ours. But cornered predators are most dangerous when they see their plans failing. On Saturday morning, an envelope was slid under my door containing photos of my daily activities, Rex's walking times, and even pictures taken through my kitchen window. The message was unmistakable. If legal harassment wasn't enough to drive me out, perhaps personal intimidation would work. It was time for the final showdown. Our coalition possessed the evidence, the community's backing, and the legal support to conclude this war for good. Sunday morning broke with an unusual quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you glance over your shoulder, anticipating trouble. I was refilling Rex's water bowl when Brenda materialized at my back gate, attired in what she likely thought was her most credible ensemble, pressed khakis and a polo shirt that conveyed a reasonable person making a reasonable offer. The shift from harassing neighbor to concerned citizen might have been persuasive if I hadn't spent months documenting her escalating criminal acts. Dale, she called out with a synthetic sweetness that set my teeth on edge. Could we have a word? I believe we should clear the air regarding all these misunderstandings. She held a manila envelope, thick enough to hold either legal papers or something more intriguing. Considering her history with envelopes, I suspected the latter. I turned on the voice recording app on my phone before unlatching the gate, a practice Rebecca had instilled in me since we began compiling the criminal case. What can I help you with, Brenda? I inquired, keeping my tone level as Rex positioned himself between us, his protective instincts on high alert from having learned to identify threats. Look, I realize things have become a bit tense between us, she started, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. but I've been considering how we might resolve this entire matter without getting lawyers and courts involved, avoiding all that unpleasantness." She opened the envelope and produced a wad of cash thick enough to stop a horse. "I am willing to give you $20,000 in cash to voluntarily end your agreement with the sheriff's department. A clean slate. No resentment. It's a win-win for everyone." The scent of new bills mingled with her palpable desperation was nearly overpowering. $20,000 was more money than I had seen at once since Sarah's life insurance payment, and Brenda knew precisely how alluring that would be to someone burdened by rising property taxes and accumulating legal fees. She had done her financial reconnaissance before presenting this offer. "That's quite generous," I remarked carefully, allowing her to dig her own hole even deeper. "But why would you want me to terminate a lawful arrangement that serves the community?" She leaned in with the intensity of someone playing their final card. "Just between us, Dale, I have some major plans for this neighborhood. Development prospects that could be beneficial for everyone, but they necessitate certain changes to the current layout." There it was, the confession Rebecca had been anticipating. Brenda was essentially admitting to a methodical plot to manipulate property values and displace long-term residents for development gains. "What sort of development prospects?" I asked, keeping her engaged while the recording app captured every incriminating statement. "Well, your corner lot holds immense commercial potential," she elaborated, warming to the topic like a salesperson about to close a sale. "It's a prime spot with existing infrastructure and easy access for commercial vehicles. With the right enhancements, it could be worth 3 times what you originally paid." She paused for dramatic effect. "Of course, that would mean getting rid of certain obstacles that might hinder proper development." The bribery attempt was a classic criminal act, but Brenda wasn't done digging her own legal grave. "I should also point out that if you're not amenable to this generous settlement, things could get very challenging for you," she went on, her tone hardening. "I have contacts at City Hall, in county planning, and even on the State Real Estate Commission. People who can make life quite difficult for someone who won't be reasonable about legitimate business ventures." That statement crossed from bribery into extortion, and I could almost hear Rebecca celebrating from her legal aid office. "Are you making a threat, Brenda?" I inquired, giving her one last opportunity to retreat before she committed to felony-level charges. "I'm simply outlining the reality of the situation," she retorted with the cold assurance of someone who believed she held all the power. "Small towns operate on relationships and favors. Those who align with community improvement initiatives tend to encounter fewer issues with permits, inspections, tax assessments, and the like. Those who resist progress often discover that bureaucracy can be a formidable obstacle." The recording was irrefutable proof of attempted bribery, extortion, and the abuse of connections in public office. But Brenda still hadn't finished her self-destruction. "Consider it carefully, Dale. 20,000 in cash, no questions asked, and a clean break from all this trouble. Or you can continue to resist and see your life become very complicated, very fast." She pushed the envelope across my patio table like a poker player going all in. "I'll need your decision by tomorrow evening. After that, this generous offer is off the table, and we'll have to handle things the hard way." I glanced at the cash, then at Brenda's expectant expression, and finally at Rex, who was emitting a low growl that could rattle the windows. "I will certainly think it over," I replied, which was technically accurate, as I would be contemplating how to use this recording to send her to prison. Could I hold on to this overnight to weigh my options? Her smile was one of pure predatory triumph. "Of course, just keep in mind that this is your opportunity to exit this whole unpleasant situation with your dignity and finances intact." She rose to depart, then turned back with a final remark that sealed her doom. "Oh, and Dale, I would hate for anything unfortunate to happen to Rex while you're considering your decision. Dogs can be so susceptible to accidents in neighborhoods where people aren't being cooperative." That threat against my dog was the final nail in her legal coffin. Rex was not just property to be threatened, he was family. And by threatening my family, Brenda had just declared total war on someone who had the evidence, community backing, and legal support to utterly defeat her. The next town council meeting was going to be very eventful. The town council chambers had never seen a crowd like the one that gathered on Tuesday evening. Every seat was occupied, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway, as if it were a major sporting event instead of a municipal meeting. News had spread through Millfield's networks more quickly than gossip at a potluck. The final confrontation between Dale and Brenda was about to happen, and no one wanted to miss it. I showed up early, carrying a briefcase filled with evidence that felt heavier than a set of mechanic's tools. Rebecca was beside me, radiating the quiet assurance of a lawyer who had spent the weekend preparing for a legal fight. Behind us, our coalition had gathered like an army, Mildred with her tablet of security footage, Frank with his pile of HOA documents, Mrs. Patterson with her sharp teacher's eye, and a dozen other neighbors who had been victims of Brenda's harassment. The local Channel 7 news team had set up their cameras after Sarah Kim's newspaper expose went viral, drawing regional focus to what she called the Millfield harassment scandal. Reporter Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the Jennifer from City Planning, was interviewing residents about the systematic intimidation aimed at elderly homeowners. The story had momentum, and everyone knew that night would decide whether justice or money would triumph. Brenda made a fashionably late entrance with a high-priced lawyer who likely billed more per hour than I earned in a month. She was dressed for a courtroom appearance, a conservative suit, minimal jewelry, and her hair styled in what consultants call a trustworthy professional look, but her eyes betrayed the desperate intensity of someone whose entire scheme was on the verge of public collapse. Mayor Patricia Rodriguez brought the meeting to order with the seriousness of someone aware that the night's events would shape her administration's legacy. We are here to examine allegations of systematic harassment directed at long-term residents, she stated, her voice projecting across the crowded room. This is a grave matter that impacts the character and safety of our entire community. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez was the first to speak, reading from an official report that outlined months of escalating criminal behavior. We have documented proof of property destruction, environmental offenses, interference with emergency services, and attempted extortion, he declared with professional clarity. This investigation has uncovered an organized effort designed to force property sales through illegal intimidation. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room, and took out my phone. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to listen to something that was recorded yesterday morning in my backyard. The audio was perfectly clear as Brenda's voice echoed through the chamber, offering $20,000 to end my lease with the sheriff, threatening bureaucratic consequences, and finally promising that things could become very difficult if I declined her generous offer. The room fell completely silent, punctuated only by the soft whir of news cameras capturing every word. You could hear people holding their breath as the recording detailed Brenda's development plans, her connections at City Hall, and her intention to make life very challenging for uncooperative residents. But the collective gasp that resounded through the chamber came when her voice threatened Rex. Dogs can be so vulnerable to accidents in neighborhoods where people aren't being cooperative. Brenda's expensive lawyer was frantically writing notes and whispering urgent counsel, but the harm was done. You cannot retract your own voice making criminal threats on a high-quality audio recording. Fire Chief Torres took the podium next, his voice trembling with restrained fury as he recounted the blocked emergency access during Mrs. Morgan's house fire. Someone intentionally obstructed life-saving apparatus during an active emergency, he declared. Mrs. Morgan could have died because of those barricades, and we have evidence that their placement is linked to this harassment campaign. The mayor then asked Brenda if she wished to address the allegations. Her lawyer recommended she remain silent, but Brenda's ego couldn't pass up one last chance to control the story. She walked to the microphone with the assurance of someone who still thought that money and influence could trump evidence and public anger. This is all a major misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by individuals who are resistant to positive change, she started, her voice laced with the same condescending tone that had angered her neighbors for months. I have been working to improve property values and enhance our community's character through legitimate business development. That's when Frank Morrison stood up from the back of the room, his postmaster's voice cutting through her rehearsed lines like a knife. Brenda, we have your HOA meeting minutes where you referred to longtime residents as obstacles to progress and talked about accelerating turnover through strategic pressure. We have your contractor invoices for those emergency access barriers. We have video of you vandalizing property and polluting storm drains. His voice swelled with righteous indignation. You tried to tear apart our community for financial gain, and everyone in this room knows it." The crowd burst into applause that went on for nearly 2 minutes. When Mayor Rodriguez finally regained control, she announced that the city council was unanimously approving full cooperation with the county prosecutors in their investigation of criminal charges. "This kind of behavior will not be tolerated in Millfield," she affirmed. "Our community stands up for its most vulnerable members, not preys upon them." County Prosecutor James Mitchell then came forward with the gravity of someone about to dispense justice. "Mrs. Thompson, you are under arrest for attempted extortion, environmental crimes, interference with emergency services, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As Deputy Martinez recited her rights, Brenda's composure finally shattered. Her high-priced lawyer was already negotiating plea deals as she was led away in handcuffs. The room erupted once more as justice was delivered, a satisfying outcome for a community that had united and triumphed. Chuck was seated in the back row, looking relieved that his tumultuous marriage was finally over. Rex, waiting outside with Mildred, likely heard the cheers from the parking lot. Justice had been served, the community was protected, and one predatory neighbor was permanently gone from our peaceful neighborhood. 3 months later, Millfield felt like a completely different place, or perhaps it had simply reverted to what it had always been before Brenda's toxic influence tainted our community. The morning sun still streamed through my kitchen window in the same way, casting long shadows on Sarah's coffee mug, which I still hadn't been able to store away. But now I could enjoy my coffee without glancing over my shoulder for hidden cameras or anticipating the next act of harassment. Brenda's criminal trial was mercifully short once the prosecutor laid out our mountain of evidence. She pled guilty to extortion, environmental offenses, and interference with emergency services, receiving a sentence of 18 months in county jail and 5 years of probation. Her landscaping business went under faster than a sinking ship, and Chuck initiated divorce proceedings before her sentencing was even complete. The house next door was sold to a young couple from Austin, both teachers, who brought cookies to the whole block and actually sought permission before borrowing my ladder. My expanded county lease was officially sanctioned the day after Brenda's arrest, generating $1,000 a month that not only covered the higher property taxes, but also gave me the financial stability I had desperately lacked since Sarah's passing. Deputy Martinez now shares the garage with the fire department's emergency supplies and the county's new community outreach coordinator, effectively making my property an informal neighborhood safety center that genuinely boosted everyone's property values, an ironic outcome, given Brenda's initial complaints. The change was felt throughout our community in ways no one had foreseen. The Sheriff's Department awarded Rex an honorary K-9-unit certificate at a block party that drew half the town to my backyard. The smell of grilling burgers mingled with the diesel fumes from the fire truck, which kids were climbing on as if it were a jungle gym. Seeing my German Shepherd pose for pictures with real police dogs while sporting a bad-shaped name tag was likely the best moment of my entire retirement. Frank Morrison was elected HOA president by a landslide, campaigning on a platform of transparency and community service rather than harassment and intimidation. His first official move was to institute term limits and mandate that all meetings be recorded, preventing future Brendas from using neighborhood politics to target vulnerable residents. The HOA budget now supports annual community festivals and emergency preparedness training instead of funding legal battles over petty complaints. Rebecca Martinez grew her legal aid practice to focus on elder harassment cases, using our documentation methods as a model for communities across Texas facing similar predatory tactics. She has since helped prosecute systematic harassment campaigns in 6 other towns, transforming our local success into a statewide effort to protect vulnerable residents. Sometimes, one person's courage to stand up can safeguard thousands of others. But the most profound changes were in the small, everyday interactions that rebuilt our faith in common decency. Mildred's garden gatherings became weekly events where neighbors exchanged resources and built friendships instead of sharing grievances and suspicions. Mrs. Patterson started walking groups that were really a way for retirees to look out for one another while staying active. The Rodriguez family opened their garage for community tool lending, fostering the kind of mutual support that makes a small town feel like one big family. I created the Sarah Hensley Memorial Scholarship Fund with a portion of my increased lease income, offering annual financial aid to local students pursuing careers in community service, such as teaching, nursing, social work, or law enforcement. The inaugural recipient was Maria Santos's daughter, who was headed to nursing school with aspirations of working in rural areas, reminding me of why Sarah would have cherished this legacy. Each year, seeing those students graduate, knowing they will go on to strengthen other communities, I can almost feel Sarah's proud whisper on the evening wind. 6 months after Brenda's arrest, I was tending to Sarah's restored rose garden when the sound of laughter came from over the fence next door. The new neighbor's twin daughters had learned that Rex was a sucker for belly rubs and a game of fetch, turning my vigilant guard dog into the neighborhood's most beloved babysitter. Their parents, both educators who had moved to Millfield because of news stories about our strong community spirit, were already hosting parent-teacher meetings in their living room. Standing in my driveway that evening, watching those little girls giggle as Rex patiently tolerated their dress-up games, I had a realization that Sarah would have deeply valued. Communities are not broken by individual predators. They are fortified when ordinary people decide that protecting one another is more important than shying away from conflict. The scent of barbecue smoke wafted from several backyards, blending with the sound of children's laughter and Rex's contented sighs. This was what home was meant to sound, smell, and feel like.